Okay, we ready to go, Nicole?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the virtual meeting of the CVTA Technical Advisory Committee for Monday, February 8th to order. So welcome. And we have our statement regarding virtual meetings and public participation is posted on the website. Is that correct, Chet?
That's correct.
All right, so we do not need to read that. And we will now do a roll call and certification of a quorum. Nicole?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos. Charles City County, Ms. Russell. Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Walker.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Mr. Kilduff.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Here.
Mr. Flagg. Henrico County, Chair Yor.
Here.
Ms. Meidler.
Here.
New Kent County, Ms. Leduc.
Here.
Powhatan County, Mr. Chardine.
Here.
Mr. Pompey. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark. Mr. Bridewell. DRPT, Mr. Brule.
Here.
Ms. Dubinsky. VDOT, Mr. Mann.
Here.
Mr. Riblett.
Here.
DRTC, Ms. Torres.
Here.
Ms. Del Ross.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Dean.
Here.
And Plan RBA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
And I can circle back to DRPT. I think Ms. Dubinsky is joining us right now. That concludes the roll call. And Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Nicole. Next item is consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda. Chet, do we have any additional agenda items?
No, sir, I don't believe we do.
Okay, very good. And next item would be the approval of the January 11th CVTA TAC action meeting minutes. So if everybody's had a chance to review, anybody have any corrections, additions? Hearing none, we need a motion and a second for this item.
This
Mark
is
Smith, so moved.
Joe Vidunas, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 There's a couple ayes.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, any opposed? How about that? Hearing none, motion carries. So minutes have been approved. Public comment period. Chet, do we have anybody signed up or online to make any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay. Next is the TAC chairman's report. I don't have anything to report beyond what's in the agenda, so that will move us to the next item on the CVTA TAC staff update. Chet?
Thank you. I wanted to just give a brief update on a couple things. The Finance Committee met on January 6th and then meets again later this week. At the meeting on the 6th, there was discussion in general about continuing to establish the fiscal agent agreements between the different jurisdictions and CVTA. And those are well underway, and there should be an update on that on Wednesday. The Finance Committee took action to appropriate funds in the amount of $80,000 from the contingency line item in the administrative and operating budget to contracted services. to cover the cost, the potential cost of developing the transit governance report. We did receive bids to our RFP, and the Finance Committee was just taking action at that point to establish all of the necessary procedures so that the board could approve the consultant at their January 29th meeting, which they did. So that project is underway, and we're looking forward to getting down to work. The new business items from the Finance Committee, there was a review of a revenue transfer schedule, basically the inflows and what the expectations are for distributions as we move forward with the year. There should have been disbursements made in the last week to everyone, every local jurisdiction. So I think that process has been vetted very well and is a good one to track now for the rest of the year. And then a discussion of the process for review and approval of disbursements, so the outflows. And we're going to get to that, a little bit of that later on in the agenda this afternoon, in terms of certifying the use of funds. And then I think that's the bulk of the items from the Finance Committee. The other item that I wanted to provide an update on was House Bill 1926, which is the dealing with membership of the CVTA. It adds the executive director of the Virginia Port Authority or their designee as a non-voting ex officio member of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. That moved through the House and passed unanimously, I believe. It was referred to the Senate, to the Committee on Transportation, and is now continued to the special session. So that is still being considered in the Senate, but I have not heard any concerns or opposition to moving that forward. So I would expect the Virginia Port Authority to be added as an ex officio member to the CVTA this year. I think that's all I have now for the staff update, Mr. Chair. Any questions on Finance Committee? Be happy to try and answer those.
I have a question. This is Joe.
Yes, Joe.
Did I hear correctly? You said that the first disbursements have been made to the localities?
I do know that the Finance Directors Working Group was discussing that over email late last week. So I would suggest checking with your Finance Director, Joe, and seeing what the progress was on that. But I know that they are all plugged in.
Right.
Joe.
I was more curious about what the amount is. I haven't seen any formal estimates and would use that first disbursement as a basis unless somebody has estimates developed.
Yes, sure. I don't have it handy right now, but we can I can get that to you after the meeting if that works.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Sure.
Yeah, Joe, I have yours here too. It's yours should have been 1,545,245.
And does that represent what does that represent? A quarter?
That represents 50% of the total sales and wholesale tax attributed to Hanover. And then, yes, you will have to talk with Plan RVA on the proportion that was removed for Ashland.
Let me just, I know we want to move right on, but just clarify, is that over like the first 3 months, or is that over a 1 month period? What period does that
Year-
represent?
Year to date through November 30th, 2020.
Okay,
And they've
Thank-
talked about that within probably a week that you should be receiving another allocation.
I believe they have the estimates through the end of December now.
thank you.
Yeah, Joe, the first check was the first 4 months of gas tax and the first 1 month of sales tax, because even though it's from November 30th, there's a lag in reporting, so it only included 1 month of the additional sales tax. And to Dorana's point, I did see an email from our finance director saying they anticipate the December payment, which at that point would be, I assume, only the month of November sales tax and another month of gas tax should be ready for distribution within the next several weeks. And I can confirm that we did receive our first payment on Friday of last week.
And the city of Richmond received ours between Friday and today.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the Finance Committee on Wednesday it's on the agenda for discussion as well. So there'll probably be more detail at that point.
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
This is Adrian. Do you guys have
Yes.
an idea of how the disbursement is working for GRTC? An update on that? Can you guys hear me? Is there any update? I guess, do you have an idea of how the disbursement works for GRTC?
I'll defer to Chad on that one.
Yeah, Adrian, let's discuss offline. I think that's probably up to discussion on Wednesday as well.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
Any other questions for Chet regarding the tax staff update? All right, hearing none, moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is top of page 2, regional project prioritization. Chet and Sulab, are y'all gonna jump in on that one?
Yes, I think Sulab's going to take that, and then we'll certainly answer any questions.
Thank you, Sulab.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen first. Can everybody see my screen now? Okay, great. So I'll be presenting about the regional project prioritization, which we intend to use for our long-range transportation plan, Connect RVA 2045. So before we start on the details, I would just like to give a background on why you are using this process and why we chose this process this time. So an overall objective of the project prioritization process for our TPO is to fully move towards in the direction of performance-based planning and programming as directed by the MAP 21 Act of 2012, as well as the FAST Act of 2015, which continued the performance-based planning and programming requirement for the MPOs. In terms of LRTP, how would you use the performance-based planning? It's basically the LRTP would look at the systematic review of the transportation system performance, looking at the past as well as the future, because we're looking for 2045. And based on the performances, we'll define the reasons, investments, priorities, so that it complies with the performance-based planning and programming. The process is to be need-based. Basically, we look at the needs, the issues of the transportation system. We developed a need for the transportation project. And then we also defined what would be our goals. So it'll be need-based, goal-based. And then finally, the goals would be measured through the performance measures, and the project performance measures would measure that need and goal in a systematic way. So overall, the process is need-based, goal-based, and performance-based. The project performance measures will access the degree to which any project implementation will advance the established vision, goals, and objectives of the plan, which was approved by the board last Thursday. So we want to go from a subjective project prioritization process, which we have used in the past, to a data-driven, transparent, and understandable process, which won't be subjective in nature and won't have any personal biases. Again, with the subjective project prioritization process, the score sometimes is not based on the actual merit of the project or the performance of the project implementation, but could be the project could score higher based on the project description or the severity of the current condition. So in this process, obviously the severity in the current condition would have value, but the more value would be given to the project implementation rather than the severity of the current condition. The score would be based on the delta difference in built and no built conditions. So we can see the actual implementation of the project and what difference it brings. So when we are looking at the delta difference, we can measure a variety of projects. It seems to be fair for all regions: urban, suburban, rural, and all modes of transportation. That's what we want: a consistent project prioritization process which works for all modes of transportation. Finally, the scoring is relative. So it's based on the pool of the project or the needs, and also has a cost benefit element towards the end. We also wanted to use the different performance measures which won't overlap. So we don't want a project which is good in one of the performance measures score the same. If we use the same type of performance measures, score good in all different categories. So we wanted the performance measures to have a minimum overlap between them. Also, the process hugely depends upon the data and the tool available to the MPO staff. The MPO staff capacity, we don't have any full-time engineers in our staff, so that has to be taken into consideration. And the time factor, if we have 300 projects in long-range transportation plan, it's going to take a lot of time for 2-3-4 staff which will be doing this. So we have to make sure that the process we use is can be done in an amount of time in which we have to do that. Some of the measures are relatively similar or simplified versions used in Smart Scale. So the measures have already been vetted by the transportation community. The experts have already developed the measures, and it has worked fine. And we don't want to turn the wheels, so we just took some of the measures from Smart Scale, make it more simplified for our use. So basically, in Connect RV 2045, we have 5 goals: safety, mobility, equity and accessibility, economic development, and environmental and land use. So based on the surveys which we have put forward towards the general public, as well as the LRTP advisory committee discussion, as well as staff's input, we decided the goal weights. So safety ranked highest in our region, so it's 25% of all score. Mobility is 15%. It was one of the least prioritized category for transportation needs by the public, and we don't have any severe congestion in the region, so it's 15%. Equity and accessibility, 25%. Economic development, 15%, and then environmental and land use, 20%. So within each goals, we have objectives, which is not shown in this table, but the goals and objectives are measured through the project performance measures. So safety would be measured through by crash frequency and crash rate, and we have the weights for each performance measures. So crash frequency is 70% of the safety measure, and crash rate is 30%. So the calculation is done in that way. Similarly, for mobility, we have person throughput and person hours of delay, each 50% of each. For equity, we have the access to jobs, which looks for the all people in the region. That's 7.5% of the total equity accessibility score. The access to job for the easier population, it's 5%. And access to destinations is 7.5% again, and access to destinations for the easier population is 5%. For economic development, we have job growth connection to truck intensive areas and truck throughput. The job growth is 50% of the weight. And then the other two, which is specific to highway mode or trucks, which would only benefit trucks, is 7% in total. And then we have 4 features for environmental land use, sensitive features, air pollution, VMT per capita, and connection to activity centers, each weighting 25% of the total 20% goal weight for environmental and land use. So I'll just go into a little much detail on what we are actually measuring in these performance measures. So the first one, safety, we are measuring in crash frequency is basically similar to smart scale, reduction in equivalent property damage only of fatal and injury crashes last 5 years. So based on the monetization of the severe and fatal injuries, we have a certain dollar amount. And what we will be looking at is the 5 years data for that specific project. And we have specified certain boundaries of the project or the project limits in which we look at those crashes. And then we'll monetize those crashes. And based on the project implementation, we will consider something called as the crash modification factor, and then calculate the percent expected crash reduction based on VDOT research as well as Federal Highways research. And basically, it will give us the amount reduction in the monetary value based on the project implementation. So it's going to be a dollar value and similar to smart scale. Similarly, the crash rate is the same. The only difference is that the measure allows for better comparison between projects on routes with different traffic volumes. So what we are basically doing is calculating the EPDO and then dividing it by the 1 million VMT or 1 million vehicles for the intersections. The mobility, again, 2 things, person throughput and person's hours of delay. For the person throughputs, it's basically the increase in person throughput in peak period. So it's the peak period is same for the region. So it's not different. Corridors might have different peak periods, but to generalize things, the peak period is 6:30 to 8:30 in the morning and 3:30 to 5:30 in the evening. So 4 hours of time that we're basically measuring the amount of the increase in the person throughput. So throughput is basically the passes from one point to another during a specific time. In our case, the peak period in the project limit. So how will we calculate it? Is basically we look at the vehicle throughput and then multiply that by the average occupancy rate, which is based on the NHTS, and then calculate the person throughput. So this is also similar to smart scale, but ours is a little bit simplified. Smart scale uses the current data, whereas we'll be using the 2045 data. Similarly, person's hour delay, same thing. It just measures the reduction in person's hours of delay based on the implementation of that project. Same thing, 2045 data. And then we have the equity and accessibility, 4 measures in it. So we have two things. One is the access to jobs and access to destinations for all population. So we are looking at the increase in average job accessibility per person and increase in access to destination per 1,000 people for all population. So what we are basically looking at is the accessibility is basically looking at the uh, changes due to the planned improvement, project improvement, the delta, and that delta basically comes from improvement in travel speeds or transit frequency or pedestrian quality of service. And due to that change, people can reach to more jobs or destination based on a certain time period. And we have established 30 minutes for autos and 45 minutes for transit. Biking and walking is also 30 minutes. So we are looking this as a system-wide measure. So we'll be looking at the change in average job accessibility per person from each TAG to each TAG, like a small geographical unit, in which the region would be divided, and basically looking from each of those smaller units to all other units. So it's basically going to be in a matrix of 845 by 845, and then we'll average it out and then divide it by the total population to see what is the net increase in average job accessibility. Similar thing with destination. The only difference is that in jobs, we are looking at it per person. In destination, we are looking for per 1,000 people, because if we look at destination per person, it's going to be a very small number. So why we calculate it for per person, we multiply that by 1,000 to get a good number for measurement. The other part is the equity part, the access to job for people, environmental justice population. Basically, we have calculated environmental justice population, the historically underserved population, minority population, low-income population, senior population, people with disabilities, limited English proficiency, and then zero-car ownership household. So based on some statistical measures, we have delineated the environmental justice areas in the Richmond region, and we will be looking at only those areas for this measure. So it'll basically, the origin would be those areas and destinations could be anywhere outside the region. So previously, for all population, we are looking from all TAGs to all TAGs. In the EJ, access to jobs and access to destination to EJs, we'll just be looking at the origins from the EJ areas to destination throughout the region. So it's not that anything which is outside the region would not get any score for the access to job EJ or access to job destination. If it's increasing the accessibility of the people living in the EJ communities in our region, even if it's outside the EJ area, that would get a score. So moving on, we have the economic development. These measures are new measures. So the first thing we're looking at is job growth. So it basically measures the increase in the decay weighted quantity of job growth adjacent to the project. So basically, we will be looking at 2017 and 2045. And it will look at the relationship between job growth and proposed improvements. This is not a truly performance measure because it's not looking at the no built and built condition, but it's data driven. The units of measurement would be job, the net increase in jobs based on the project implementation. The other one is connection to truck intensive areas. So we have truck intensive areas in our region in which the truck trip ends per employee is higher than usual because it contains a concentration of industrial or warehousing land uses or a specific truck generating activities such as a truck stop or intermodal transfer facility or a trucking firm office. So we have that delineated for our region. We have those areas by TAZ. And we only look at the truck intensive jobs within that areas, basically the agriculture, mining, construction, manufacturing, transportation, retail, and wholesale trade. So basically what we are looking at is the connection of that project to these areas. And the units of measurement is the truck intensive units, which is basically the change of truck intensive jobs from 2017 to 2045. So again, this is not a true performance measure. It doesn't have a built and no built comparison, but it's still, again, data driven. The third one is truck throughput. So this is similar to the person throughput, in which we measured mobility, but in this case, it'll be only looking at the trucks. So trucks are basically defined as FHWA category 6 and above. So we'll be looking at the increase in truck throughput due to the implementation of that specific transportation project. Trucks don't have a peak period, as autos have. Different corridors might have different peak periods. So the unit of measurement is all day. So we'll be looking at the all day periods. And then we have the environmental and land use categories. The first one is sensitive features. So we'll be looking at the percentage of wetland, resiliency, water hazard zones, conservation lands, habitat, and cultural resources within 1/4 mile of the project. And we'll be looking at the percentage of overlap. The lower this is an inverse measure. So it's not negative, but it's inverse. So the lower the overlap, the project would get more score. And again, this is not a true performance measure, but it'll just look at the overlap of the project within 1/4 mile of the project limit. The other performance measure is air pollution. So Richmond region has been historically had issues with meeting the ozone standards. So that's why we are only looking at the VOC, volatile organic compounds, and nitrous oxides, rather than looking at all the other 5 criteria pollution. So we're basically looking at the reduction of those 2 ozone precursors based on the implementation of the project. And it's going to be measured in metric tons per year. And this is true performance measures, as we will be using at the built and no built conditions. So basically, this would be measured based on speed of the corridor. The speed changes due to the implementation of project. So the VOC and NOx emissions is directly related to the speed. So normally the emission reduces to the speed of, I think, around 62 miles per hour, after which it starts to increase. So if based on the implementation of the project, in a highway project, there is a significant gain in speed, then we can actually see the air pollution benefits from that transportation project. For other modes transportation, like the active transportation or transit, we'll be using the change in modes here due to that implementation of project, and then we'll calculate the VMT and multiply that with the VMT factors. So for those projects, it's going to be a positive benefit all the time. And then finally, the VMT per capita, which is basically a very simple measure, looking at the reduction in Delhi VMT per capita due to the implementation of project. And again, this is true performance measures. We'll be looking at 2017 and 2045, and the change of VMT due to the implementation of that project, and divided by the total population of the region to get the VMT reduction per capita. The final one is the connection to the activity centers. So based on the socioeconomic data we have developed, we have delineated certain activity centers in the Richmond region, basically looking at the population and employment concentration now and in the future, and is also based on the guidelines provided by the DRPT multimodal guidelines. So we use their definition as well to define our activity centers. So those places of concentration of population and employment in the future, if any project is adjacent to these areas, they would get more score. That's the main concept of this. And this is again not a true performance measures, but we'll be measuring 2017, the difference from 2017 to 25. And the unit of measurement would be activity units, which is basically the total of population and employment change from 2017 to 2045. So similar like what we have in smart scale, we have the 15 performance measures. We calculate the raw performance measure score for all these 15 measures, and then we normalize that value. So the highest scoring project would get 100, and the lowest scoring project would be getting 0, and everything else in between. And we'll input the normalized value, which would be multiplied by the PM weights. And then that would give us the goal value for each of those performance measures, which would be multiplied again by the goal weight. And then we'll have the weighted goal value. While when we add that, that gives us the project benefit. And then we enter the project cost and then divide the project benefit by the project cost to get the Connect RVA 2045 project score. I will demonstrate towards the end that the project, just looking at the raw project benefit and the project score, there's a lot of difference. So I'll demonstrate that later on. So for our presentation to the LRTP Advisory Committee, we did a test scoring and ranking for 5 different projects, variety of projects. So we chose North Gayton Interchange at I-64, which is a new interchange project. I think the IJR was just completed a year or 2 years back, which is in Henrico County. The Pole Green Road widening was basically adding 1 lane each direction in Hanover County, which is already, I think, in the tip. The Route 1 new transit line, the demonstration project, which started in Chesterfield last year, added that as a transit project. The ATP or the Fall Line Chickahominy Crossing, which is an active transportation project, which was a joint smart scale application from Henrico and Hanover, and as well as Route 60 and Route 522 intersection improvement, which is in Powhatan County, so that we can test a rural location project as well. So this is what we got. If we look at the project benefit, the Route 1 transit line scored the most. The project score, let me tell you about the project's cost. I think all the 4 projects, except the transit line, I think those are accurate. For the transit line, since it was a demonstration project, I wasn't pretty sure what would be the project cost. So basically, I just use an assumption of 5 to 10 years of operational cost to get that project total. So once we calculated all the 15 performance measures and added those, I think the transit project scored highest as a project benefit. The Gayton Road interchange scored second. The Pole Green Road widening scored third. The Route 60, Route 520 intersection scored fourth, and then the ATP trail scored fifth, just looking at the raw project benefit. And then when we divided that by the project cost, we can see the Gayton Road interchange, because of the Hughes cost value, 80 million, it came down as 5. Route 1 transit line still number 1. The Pole Green Road still number 2. Went from 3 to 2. The ATP trail, which was basically 5th because of the cost value, came as 3, and then Route 60, 522 from 5th position to 4th, and then the Gayton Road finally came into the 5th position. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up on what is the similarity and difference in the project prioritization process in Connect RVA 2045, which we'll be using, as well as what is there in Smart Scale Round 4. So for safety, I think the weights are a little bit different. For crash frequency, our total weight is 17.5%. For crash rate, it's 7.5%, whereas in Smart Scale is 14 and 6% respectively. The difference basically is it's relatively same. I think, as I mentioned, more weights in Connect RVA 2045. For safety calculation in smart scale, they use a variety of project sphere of influence. And we in Connect RVA just wanted to generalize it as 250 feet buffer for all types of project. So that's the only difference. For person throughput, I think it's the same weight, 7.5% in Connect RVA as well as in Smart Scale. And the only difference is that for the Smart Scale, I think they analyze it for the current situation, whereas for us, we analyze it for 2045. For Smart Scale, they use variety of tools. For us, we use a more simplified version based on the travel demand model. For equity and accessibility, the access to jobs, we have a 7.5% weight. I think Smart Scale has 15%. For easy, I think it's the same. The access to destination, that's new. That's not in the Smart Scale. We are looking more than just the jobs. We are also looking at the connection to destinations. I think for the easier population, the Smart Scale only looks at the minority and low income population. And I think I exactly don't know how that they delineate based on the state average or the regional average. I don't know that. But for us, we look at just the regional population and the regional average. The data is more local than what's been used in Smart Scale. For destinations, we look at the weighted destination. We look at grocery stores, pharmacies, healthcare facilities. Basically, these three criteria are considered essential destinations, and they are weighted more. And then we have other destinations, schools and colleges, libraries, government centers, and parks, which are called basically non-essential destinations and which are weighted less. I think the plan is that probably from the next round, we use more destinations, but due to the limitation of the data and the time taken to develop this data, we only limited these destinations this time. Overall, the equity score in Smart Scale is 5%. For us, the overall equity score for the project is 10%. So in that respect, we are higher than Smart Scale. For the economic development, I think we use a relatively simpler measure. Smart Scale looks at the specific site plans and square footage, requires a ton of information, whereas we only look at the TASI level data and generalize that information. We look at the connection to truck intensive areas. I think VDOT, the Smart Scale uses a different methodology for that. And the final one, the truck throughput, we use truck throughput, whereas Smart Scale looks at the travel time reliability. Ours is a more simple measure, and it's relatively difficult to calculate the travel time reliability. So that's why we choose this measure. For environmental and land use, I guess it's almost the same for sensitive features. The only change is that VDOT has, Smart Scale has negative scoring for that process. We don't have anything negative. It's an inverse measure for us, but no project would have any negative score based on that. Whereas in Smart Scale round 4, I think they have negative score for that. Air pollution, ours is more data driven and based on the modeling approach as used by VDOT environmental division, whereas Smart Scale is more subjective in nature. And then VMT per capita is, I think Smart Scale focuses on work destinations within working distance. Ours is more general and looks at the region-wide influence of project on commuting patterns. Connection to activity centers, we look at the working distance. I think the Smart Scale looks at the working distance centers. We look at the project to the near to the activity centers, up to 2 miles buffer. So that's the, I think, basic difference in Smart Scale round 4 as well as our project prioritization method. And I think Chet would distribute this to everybody after the meeting as well. The last thing which I just wanted to mention is that we are also looking at something beyond the project scoring, which I have just discussed, which is basically the benefit cost analysis. So this looks at the net present value of benefit at the individual project level. The benefit could be negative or positive, and it looks at the absolute benefit of the project. It's not relative to any project. So the cost benefit factor of each project would be absolute in number. It's not relative to any project. For the Connect RV 2045, we are just using this for demonstration, because this requires a lot of information and a lot of calculations and a lot of research, and has to be vetted by the LRTB advisory committee and other communities as well. So we just wanted to see how it works this time, and probably next time we can look at this measure. So what we are basically looking at is that we derive the transportation benefit due to the implementation of that project, transportation project. So we can divide the benefit basically as an operational mobility benefit, environmental benefit, access benefit, a safety benefit, and then quality of life benefit. So for operational benefit, basically looking at the hours of delay, auto delay and truck delay for highway projects, and then person delays for active transportation and transit project. So basically, by finding the truck value of time and the auto value of time, we can calculate the monetize this benefit. Similarly, safety benefit is pretty much similar of what we do in smart scale as well as our project prioritization. Basically look at the reduction in fatal and injury crashes. So basically simple calculation. D is basically delta and fatal injuries. And the cost of the fatal injuries, fatal as well as injury, severe injury and cost, and then multiply that by the injury cost. So basically the same thing which we are doing. Environmental benefit, reduction in VOx and NOx. So we basically calculate the delta and then the cost of VOC reduction per ton as well as the NOx reduction per ton. The excess benefit obviously is looking at the additional jobs and destination reached by auto, transit and biking within 30 minutes, 45 minutes by transit, and as well as the new access to transit. So basically we'll be looking at the additional jobs and transit multiplied by the person value of time. For number of jobs, for destination, we need to convert the destination to persons equivalent. And that we're still working on how to do that. Basically looking at the occupancy of each destination or the visit, every day how many people visit those destinations. And again, also the value of access to transit. So if there's a new transit route, it provides access to people who don't have any other choices. So monetizing that as well. The final thing is the quality of life benefit. We are looking at the benefit which cannot be captured by the first four categories. So anything health related, like the stress relief or social benefit or things like that, anything which is not captured by the first four categories. So the benefits can be divided into user and non-user. The user would be the actual person who will be using the system. The non-user would be the one which will not be using the system but still be benefiting because of the implementation of that project. So that all needs to be calculated for the quality of life benefits. And we don't have a concrete calculation at this time. We're still researching on it. And then obviously the total benefit would be operational benefit, safety benefit, environmental benefit, access benefit, and the quality of life benefit. Total cost would be obviously the construction cost, the engineering cost, the right-of-way cost, and the maintenance cost per year, because we are just monetizing this for each year. And obviously the benefit cost ratio is total benefit by total cost. And if it's more than one, the project is beneficial. And once we score this for all projects, the project would having the highest benefit would obviously be ranked first, and so forth. So this is just for demonstration for this this round. And we just wanted to see what would be the comparison based on our project prioritization method and this method. And I think that's all I have. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sulab. Questions for Sulab?
Hey, CW, this is Tom Coleman, Goshen County.
Mhm.
I guess, is it fair to say that that these performance measures have not been approved by the TPO yet, and they could be subject to change before they're ultimately approved?
So this has been approved by the LRTP Advisory Committee. So it's, since these are technical in nature, we are not taking this to the policy board. So I think LRTP Advisory Committee has that authority to authorize this thing. So since they have already approved it, I think this is final for our, at least for this round.
So Sulab,
Mhm.
I think you mentioned this early that you have to determine whether you have the horsepower to evaluate all the projects submitted.
Mhm.
Yeah, it seems pretty labor intensive.
Yes, we are using our consultant support to streamline the travel demand model. The travel demand model as it is cannot suffice to these calculations, so they need to be worked on. They are working on this, and it'll be, we'll somehow customize the travel demand model to give us the outputs which we need. Obviously, since each project is individual, we have to run each project individually. So the travel demand model run is 4 to 5 hours. So for each project, and for each project, we have to run that. For the ones which we are not using travel demand model, which are basically based on GIS and other tools, we have already automated those. So those would be pretty quick. We have already developed those automations in GIS and other softwares. So
How many do you have that need the TDM?
we haven't finalized it yet, but I think they might. I think it should be around 200 or more.
Oh my gosh.
Barb, we're looking at running multiple versions of the model on different workstations so that it's not just one iteration at a time.
Yeah. Well, I do have some concerns about some of the measures. Sensitive areas is one.
Mhm.
If you had, let's say, a bridge improvement over the James River near a historic site, near a lot of historic sites, you would penalize that project, which doesn't make sense to me. In the plan development process, we have to go through environmental certifications and environmental mitigation. So having that as a measure of a project's value, I don't think matches up here, which has been a concern with Smart Scale all along also. And then of course, I feel like I've said it so many times, I hate to make people listen to me say it again, but including fatals the way that you're showing here skews the data. Fatals are hard to prevent with a road improvement project. So there's probably a better way to deal with the fatals, either as a severe injury accident, or I don't know, some other way. So those are two of my gut reactions.
Right. At least for the sensitive features, we are not providing any negative score. So obviously, it's an inverse measure, as you mentioned, but it won't cancel any scores which the project has already scored based on other factors. Unlike Smart Scale, it's a negative score. So.
Yeah, and this is Todd. I'll kind of tag on to what Barbara's saying on the sensitive areas. So we all know at this point that trail segments, particularly fall line, did not score well in round 4 of Smart Scale. A lot of the sections of the fall line are in sensitive areas, floodplain and so forth. And again, mitigation measures have to be put in place. All those things were looked at as part of the VDOT's A to P study. So that's been considered yet. The scores for the fall line, particularly in the environmental section, were in often cases 0 as a result of because their proximity to sensitive areas. So that's problematic. If even though you're saying we're not going negative with those scores, still scoring 0 in a major category doesn't help your overall score. So that's, I think, probably a consideration. And also will agree with what Barb's saying about the fatal accident measure and how disproportionate that is as currently calculated in Smart Scale.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that.
This is Diana, City of Richmond, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I too, I think that even though I was privy to getting a very good understanding of the process, I think that as far as the CVTA and some of the complexities of this, as you all have previously stated, and really what outcome it has for and equity among all of the localities that are involved. I'm not sure. I know we did some test projects, but I'm not really sure if this if a more simple process would be more advantageous in the beginning, and then as we move forward, try to enhance it. But I think this as a starting point is quite challenging. But I do understand it now, so I am happy about that. But I think that there may be some logistical challenges, both if this tool were to be utilized.
Thank you for that, Dorana. So that raises a good question, going back to the, I guess, the complexity, difficulty, and man hours that are going to be required to screen your full list of projects that are going to be part of the LRTP, which we assume that will be the universe of projects that will feed into the CVTA project list for regional priorities. So I guess Chet and Sulab, can y'all maybe talk a little bit more as far as what kind of timeline you anticipate being able to run that entire universe of projects through the LRTP process?
Sure, I'll jump in, Sulab, if that's all right. I mean, we're right now we're finalizing the universal projects. The testing will begin in the next few weeks, and is expected to be carried out through the spring, possibly into early summer. I think we have that flexibility built into the schedule. We're confident that with the assistance we've gotten from our consultant, that from our TDM consultant, that the extensions to the model that are being developed are going to be able to help with accessibility and the other new scores that we built in. I think that it's important to, and this is kind of a tangent, but I think it's important to consider the process itself for the long range plan. We have some requirements that we weren't able to meet in previous versions of the long range plan in terms of data dependency and equity that we did get concerns from our federal and state partners in previous versions. So we have to do some of these things as part of the process anyway. And I think, and another point, and then I'll let Sealab jump in. I think we've got to think about the process for identifying fundable projects, our constrained plan. This prioritization process will help to identify what was previously called the time bands, and which would be the short-term priorities versus medium-term priorities versus long-term priorities. And I think in terms of the CVTA context, I see that as a benefit for CVTA to have those type of time band prioritization recommendations, because then CVTA will be able to see which projects are recommended to move forward and have funding that is identified just by the TPO long range plan, and then which ones need some additional help. So I think the combination of the two is really is something to be excited about. It's just a matter of working through over the next few months this prioritization process, so all of that can be in front of everybody. Sealab, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered everything. Just wanted to say that the long range transportation plan is due by October 31st. And we have to have a couple of months time before the board approval for public participation and review period. So the constraint list of project has to be somehow adopted by the board in July timeframe. July, I think that would be the best. So looking forward to that, I think June would be the time in which we'll have all the project prioritization finalized for sure.
I'm good. Thank you. So that's helpful. So June timeframe for generating those results. Question on the normalization process. We've seen for the last number of rounds of smart scale that normalization on the statewide level has created unpredictable results, number one, and number two, skewed project scoring based on what particular project or projects across the state have kind of resulted in the imbalance of the scoring and hence the transfer to the normalization. So any thoughts on what that looks like for the universe of regional projects and how normalization may create similar issues or concerns, or do you not see that the case here?
Unless we have the final results, we can't say that. But what we are focusing now is try to make projects in smaller chunks. So we won't have one major big project. For example, Route 288 and 360 in Chesterfield County, overall it's a 400 million improvement, but I think we are breaking it down to 8 or 9 different projects. So I think that would, as we break down the cost and projects, the benefit would also be broken down. So we won't have a seamless benefit from that project as we want to see from the overall implementation. So I think that's the principle which we are using, try to break down into smaller segments and smaller projects, which basically I don't think would skew other projects. But unless we see it ourselves, I can't make a statement at this time.
Okay, thank you. Joe, you had a comment?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to circle back on a couple of things. Just getting back into the scoring, I've always been troubled by the fact that we're scoring different project types, but that's probably too big of an issue to tackle. In other words, we're scoring active transportation projects with congestion projects with other types of projects. And I just don't think you can it's too far apples to oranges, in my opinion. But the one thing that has bothered me about the scoring, particularly with relative to active transportation projects, is it appears that the safety score is 0 for like bike ped projects. And that's just counterintuitive. I understand why it's 0 based upon how the methodology is set up, but it's just counterintuitive if that we're adding sidewalks, for example, in a corridor, that we've not made that corridor safer for pedestrians. So that's one comment. And then the second thing, Chet, circling back to a comment you made about the projects in the LRTB being funded, correct me, but I don't think that's actually the case. I mean, it would be a financially constrained plan, but it's not a funding plan. And so I don't see how that necessarily helps the CVTA in their decision-making process.
Yeah, that's a good point, Joe. I poor choice of words on my part. These are the LRTP establishes the projects that can reasonably be expected to be funded over the life of the plan, based on the budgets that have been provided by federal highways and federal transit. And my thought is that anything that would typically be outside of that constrained list in a vision plan that has no idea of where funding might come from, that may be something that CVTA would like to prioritize. If it's if there's political charge behind it or something else. The other thing would be that if a constrained project that's number 45 on the list rather than number 3 would like to be moved up by the CVTA, then that's another opportunity. But yeah, thanks for calling me on that.
And Joe, I'll speak real quick to your point about the active transportation project. So based on what I know of Smart Scale, I mean, really you're finding a proxy to figure out some sort of benefits for projects. So things such as bike ped are in many cases hard to quantify how it's going to reduce congestion or even decrease crash rates necessarily, unless you have pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries in a corridor. So if you're looking at a trail alignment for, let's say, a fall line trail that's not on a section near a major arterial that has a high pedestrian crash rate, it's really hard to capture some of those proxy points that are developed in Smart Scale, which goes back to the part of the reason that fall line sections did not score well in Smart Scale. So we could talk in more detail about that, but we're kind of trying to dig into deconstruct all that as we speak, since the Smart Scale draft results have been fairly recent. Barb, you wanted to make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the idea of breaking expensive projects down into smaller projects, which I understand that, but there are times when you can't break an expensive project down. Mm-hmm. And as we've seen with Smart Scale, there are some pretty important high cost projects that we just cannot get funded through the process. And so to get winners, localities submit low cost, kind of not that important projects so they can get some money, when really, that interchange needs to be reconstructed. It's just, there's something off. And I feel like in the Smart Scale process, it is at the detriment of some pretty important roadways from a regional or state perspective. So I don't want our process to get us into that box where everyone's submitting little dink projects that are winners, because that's how we crafted the prioritization process.
Todd, can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
So yeah, I think that's a great point, Barb. I mean, our TPO chair has a certain project that she likes to remind us all is a regional priority that had the exact fate that you're talking about. So I think that what staff wants to do is provide as much information as possible to the authority in the CVTA context, so that the background is known, and then decisions about what those regional priorities that receive the 35% of revenues can be made with the history and the background behind it. And it's also why, and I'm glad Sula put this on the screen, I think it's important to note the project score, but also the project benefit. I think through looking at the project benefit, you get the idea of the raw impacts of the project. And then having the project score helps, because then you would know if how much of a chunk of your 35% are you actually taking away for one or two projects. So that's where the decision-making process comes in terms of each annual cycle, which projects are deemed worthy at that time for CVTA regional funds. But it's going to be a lively discussion when the authority gets to the point where they're going to be looking for attack recommendations and deciding which project should receive those funds each year.
Right. So I can see this long-range plan process serving as a foundation, but I do think it needs some modification to really help us in making recommendations to the authority to address some of the concerns that we've heard today.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Diana.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the legislation, and it talks about a prioritization process. And I think that this addresses the objective and quantifiable analysis. But I do think, and even to some of Barb's point, and the TPO's chair, if we're having enough for the consideration of the benefits of the project relative to their cost, I think that that's something that I don't know if I see that kind of distinctly or enough in this process for even the CVTA to potentially make a good decision on the outcome of this process. So again, that's specifically lines 65 and 66. And again, considering the benefits of projects relative to their cost. And if we're having the benefit only a cost based on this with little segments, is there something that is missing from this process that really could show that benefit relative to the cost? And it may be a more qualitative format that occurs, or I'm not sure.
No, I'll speak to that briefly, Dorana. Thank you for bringing that up and pulling the legislation. So the legislation is very specific, yet very open in what's required. It says it needs to be quantifiable and it needs to consider benefits to cost, but it does not define what those benefits in fact are. Smart scale legislation is more specific with respect to what some of those measures that need to be considered under benefits. So smart scale is a little bit more bound to the legislation. So to your point, Dorana, the benefits as defined through the CVTA for regional funding can be whatever the collective group, the body decides those benefits are. So it can be quantifiable, it can be qualitative, it can be a combination. So to Barb and Chet's previous point, certainly the long range plan process, which is very data driven, as required by the federal regulations on the TPO side, certainly are important to help inform what the benefits and what the priorities should be, but not as a standalone. That can certainly be one piece of it, but we also need to consider the purpose of the CVTA and meeting the regional needs that aren't being currently satisfied through Smart Scale, because that's one of the reasons that the CVTA got traction and was approved, because our regional priorities are not getting funded and built necessarily. And to Barb's point is, everybody knows there's a sweet spot in the Smart Scale system for projects in the $10 million range, and if you can get through all of the estimate reviews and escalations to keep a project under 10 million, you're not really getting to build a whole lot with Smart Scale money for $10 million, and certainly you can argue you're not meeting regional needs, and you can only break up a $80 or $90 million project in so many pieces, and get it funded through Smart Scale and have it a viable project. So a lot of considerations. The other suggestion I'll make is that, and Chet, we haven't really talked about this, is are we gonna have a definition for what qualifies as a regional project? Because what's a regional priority in the metropolitan area and the built up area of the city and Rico and Chesterfield may not be the same type of project that's considered a regional need by some of the rural counties. You mentioned New Kent in particular, but they're unique in what their I guess priorities are. But what about the others?
We have definite criteria set up for the long range plan to identify what a regional project is and what one isn't. So I think staff's recommendation will be to use that.
Okay.
I mean, if CVTA TAC would like to look at other options, then we're certainly willing to do that.
I guess another thing we have not talked about is one of the options that the CVTA has is the ability to leverage against other funding sources, whether that be Smart Scale, whether that be RSTP, CMAQ, any number of other grant programs. So similar consideration has to be made on the cost side, is at what point and which projects are most beneficial to leverage against Smart Scale funding versus using exclusively CVTA regional funding, or a combination of CVTA regional and local funding to have those projects funded. Tom, you raised your hand.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I think for me, the slide, I think you're putting that slide up, it's on the screen right now. And I guess one thing that's missing for me, if we look at like the Route 1 transit line versus the North Gate and interchange, because that was what is shown. If you look at the number of passengers they're going to utilize those improvements, the number of passengers they would use in North Gate and interchange would be exponentially more than the transit line, I would imagine. And I think that's one thing that is sort of missing. There does seem to be a bias towards funding smaller projects that fewer people will use. And I think if we're funding smaller projects that fewer people will use, it touches then we're really not funding the regional priorities. And I think that's just one thing that's missing for me.
That's a good point, Tom. This is Barb.
Do you have more to add to that, Barb?
Nope.
Other comments, questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that since we have to base our project scoring based on the federal regulations and guidelines, as we have all seen from, I think, T21 to Test T to Safety Loo, the focus has been in other types of project rather than highway projects. The federal government is asking the MPOs and regions to support other types of project rather than the highway projects. So that has been the general federal guidance since a few years now.
Thank you for that clarification, Tulab. And yes, I mean, certainly this region has evolved in the last several decades to prioritize other types of projects beyond just highway projects. But the reality is we still have a lot of unfunded highway projects that we can't continue to overlook. So certainly certainly we need to acknowledge that and continue to look to fund other types of transportation projects, but not at the exclusion of some of the highway improvements, which only get more expensive, not cheaper. And Sulab, while people consider any other questions or comments, can you go back a couple slides where you have the presentation up to where you had the different categories? Right there. Go to the second page of the performance measures. What's the what's the purpose of the asterisk that's next to, for example, job growth and connection to truck intensive areas and sensitive features, as well as the connection to activity centers? What's the significance of the asterisks?
So the ones with the asterisks are not true performance measures, meaning that they don't have a built and no built comparison, whereas the others have the actual built and no built comparison. All of them are data driven, but those are not true built and no built comparison.
Okay, thank you. And I had one more question on that. So Smart Scale doesn't fully take into account the growth of traffic, out year growth based on if you improve a facility or build a new facility. It doesn't account for the traffic growth and the measures. Will that be addressed with this methodology?
Since we are looking at the future year 2045, the data is already inbuilt in the model since we developed the socioeconomic data for 2045 already. So it's going to take into consideration all those employment and population growth.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. More questions, comments, suggestions?
Mr. Chair, this is Diana.
Yes, Diana.
And so I think that while there is great benefit in this long-range plan prioritization process, and definitely elements that could and should be used potentially on CVTA projects, I think some of the one main thing that's probably we want to take a good look at is eligibility criteria. I think that we've kind of touched on that. And I think Chet said that, the long range plan had their definitions, but that may be something that would assist us in this process, is kind of examining those and kind of seeing if there may be some elements of that we could utilize for the CVTA process to help us, to assist us in this process.
So in the screen, you can see the definition which we use for our project inclusion guidelines. So basically, it's drawn from the Code of Federal Regulation, regionally significant, which is kind of vague. So we develop our own definition. So basically, for roadway projects, any big projects like anything which would include in the RTC model is basically collectors and above. Capacity change, which is add or remove lane, changing of use of lane like the HOT or HOV lane or bus any lanes, realignment, extension, relocation, new interchange modifications, overpass, underpass, and then major intersection improvements like only the arterials like if both the roads in the intersections are at least minor arterials, then only we consider the arterial, the intersection improvement, and any new road or alignment which would normally be coded in the travel demand model. That's basically for the highway projects, and then we have for other projects as well.
These project inclusion guidelines were all vetted by the LRTP advisory committee.
Yep.
Over the last 9 months.
And I'm sorry, and a little bit of what I was speaking was not the project category, but rather the regional eligibility of the project itself. So, you know, the project needs to be, you know, multimodal. It needs to do A, B, and C. So, I mean, that's what I was speaking of for the CVTA.
This is Barb. As far as regional goes, the second bullet under roadway, realignment, extension, relocation. We do a lot of realignments on little dinky secondary roads. So I don't know about that.
So it has to be, so it says project on roads included in the RTC model, and then that's the sub criteria within that. So it has to be collector and above.
So basically, a project is eligible for federal funding for any improvements, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, collector and above is still.
Yeah, it's not a black and white definition. Still, there's still some gray portion in it, but we wanted to make it black and white. I don't think that's possible. So
I think maybe what both Dorona and Barbara are getting at is, you know, of the universe of projects that would be defined under this list, maybe there's a subcategory that would need to surface to the top to be maybe a priority for regional funding. So certainly doing a realignment on a collector roadway in a particular jurisdiction may be a priority for that jurisdiction, and they may be eligible for RSTP, CMAC, or even SMART scale to do those improvements. Certainly local CVTA money might be appropriate as well, but at that point, is that necessarily where we want to, I guess, focus regional funding at the CVTA level for a facility like that? Just throw that out there for consideration. So maybe this is the broad definition, but we need to further filter that down for where regional funding should be focused.
Todd, this is Barb.
Yes, Barb.
What kind of action are you looking for on this today?
I'll defer to Chet. I mean, it's not listed as an action item. I think this is really just the first deep dive into kind of what a process may look like with further discussion and consideration expected. Is that correct, Chet?
Yeah, that's correct. We've got, I mean, we have a direction we're moving with on the TPO side, but at this point, it's information only for CVTA. I would suggest possibly considering establishing a project prioritization subcommittee or some smaller group to think about these details over the next few months. I mean, as Sulab discussed in the timeline, we do have a little bit of time to develop an approach from the CVTA side while the project priorities are developed.
Actually, I appreciate that suggestion, Chet, and I know you and I have spoken to that. So I think that's maybe a good approach, because as exciting as all this is, maybe not everybody on this meeting wants to continue to take a deep dive into all these issues. So maybe whatever we want to call it, whether it be a working group or subcommittee, I'll defer to you on the semantics, but maybe that's the the next step, and we can maybe meet on a schedule that's not as limited to the one per month for the full TAC.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd suggest that staff send out correspondence to everyone seeking interest and trying to set up a committee and hopefully come back to the next meeting of the CVTA TAC with a recommendation for a committee.
Sounds good. So let's talk about timeline. I know in the conversations with our management, there's a great interest in getting this process developed to some degree. I don't know what the expectation of the administrators and the elected officials are for starting to spend the regional money, but I know they're very interested in how the process is coming along. I know at the last several finance committee meetings, the mayor, who's the chair of the finance committee, is always routinely asked about how that process is going. So certainly, I think it would be important to get the group formed relatively quickly and at least have an initial meeting to start talking through this.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Diana.
Yes, Diana.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not so sure that even waiting until the next meeting before we can start talking about it would work. I'm not sure. I think we have all the members on here, and we could have Nicole record who is interested in participating.
I think that's acceptable. I know we did that with one of the finance subcommittee. So if everybody's amenable with that, we can just take names now of those that are interested. And if somebody wants to think about it or check with their management and get back to us, maybe give a couple days for follow up before the full group is formed. Is that acceptable, Chet?
Whatever the group would like to do is fine with us.
Okay. So volunteers then.
I'm in, Barb.
All right, Barb, thank you.
City of Richmond, Diana.
Thank you.
GRTC, Adrian Torres.
Thank you, Adrian.
And over Joe Dennis.
Thank you, Joe.
Sharon with Henrico, unless Todd, you really want it.
We'll tag team. So Henrico's
Okay.
in.
Goochland's in. This is Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else?
Jessa's in also. This is Barb.
Okay. Yeah, maybe let's get a clarification that maybe participation is by locality. So if you have somebody on your staff that has experience or can help inform the process. So for example, I know Chess is very good at parsing through smart scale, and as is Trail Hughes on our end. So he may not be officially part of the committee, but we'll certainly bounce things off of him. And I know in the case of Sharon, she was on the long range committee, so she can help inform with how that process went. And obviously we'll want to rely, Chet, on you and Sulab for helping with the I guess interpretation and any I guess pieces of the long range process that would be relevant to this process as well.
Yes, happy to serve. Did you see the note from Kelly is going to check with Mr. Hathaway?
That's fine.
Hey Todd, this is Tiffany Dubinsky. Jen and I would be glad to provide any kind of technical assistance on this. I know I just saw Mr. Mann also say that BDOT's available if desired. So just let us know how you would like to be engaged, and we'll be willing to be a part of the subcommittee for this.
Very good. Thank you, Tiffany. And yeah, I see Shane's comment in the chat box. I had the chat box open earlier and it closed. So sorry if I've ignored anybody else's comments in the chat. So. All right, so that I think gives us some direction, and then we'll need, I guess, somebody to offer to, I guess, take the lead on that working group subcommittee. And not that we need a volunteer now, unless somebody's feeling volunteers. Hearing none, so we'll consider that, and I guess the next task for that group will be to establish the date and time for the first meeting. Maybe we can look out a week or so and look for some time on one of the days, possibly next week, to at least have an initial meeting to start to talk through this. Anybody have any other comments, suggestions, concerns on this item? All right, thank you, Sulab, for your presentation on that. That's going to be posted on the website chat for the presentations from this meeting.
Yes, we'd be happy to share the presentation.
Yeah, I know it was on the long range plan side, but it'd be helpful to replicate it here for ease of access. Thank you. Next item, certification reporting, confirmation of member spending plans. Jeff.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background first. This probably won't take long. As we remember, we've discussed in the past, there's really two hooks to ensure that the money is being spent for the transportation purposes it was set aside for. The first is in our bylaws, which require development of a spending plan pre-expenditure is the assumption. So this is the item for discussion today. The other hook is it's more entrenched with the audit requirements, which would take a look at the end of the fiscal year what the revenues were used for by each jurisdiction to ensure, and that's really the more committed review of transportation expenditures. We're not going to handle that today, and that's probably an item that starts with the Finance Committee. What I wanted to share today, hopefully everyone has seen it and been able to respond. Actually, you have, because I have all 9 jurisdictions. We sent out a spreadsheet asking you to provide as much information as possible for each jurisdiction, what the intent was for expenditures in fiscal year 21. That's the important thing to highlight here. This is the first time we've done this. So it's really for the next 5 months trying to figure it out and make sure we've set up the process the way that we want as an authority. Again, being in the bylaws, I think there's some flexibility for the authority to set up this spending plan as it would like to. With the intent here is to get this one under our belts and then either use this tool or something else for FY22 and send out a similar request probably in May to TAC members with the intent for July 1 and the entire next fiscal year. So this is the beginning of the year process, and then the audit stuff would be at the end of the year. So what I have on the screen is the responses we received from each jurisdiction. And again, everybody looks like is using the funds for transportation purposes, or have elected not to spend any of their funds in this fiscal year. Staff used the template that we sent out and tried to fill in some information where it was possible. For example, UPC, we tried to look up UPC numbers for projects if we could find them. We also tried to look up estimated total cost for projects if we could find them. I don't think anybody submitted estimated total costs for projects. So some of this is up for discussion today. Proposed CVTA funds. This is the big item because this is basically the funding from the local funds that were expected to be used in FY21. And then we had additional columns here if there were other committed funds to identify any notes, and then remaining funds needed. Again, if we don't know the estimated total cost, we can't tell what the remaining funds needed are. So, and then I just went through and highlighted the sections where we could fill in additional information if it was available. And I'd be happy. I plan on sending this out to everyone following the meeting for confirmation. But I think the intent now is that this spreadsheet will serve as the data behind the spending plan and the intent. If Eric, if you're there, is there anything else that I may have missed in terms of bylaws or what we need to do with this that you might be aware of? And this is out of the blue.
Yeah, sorry. I don't think so, but perhaps we could chat about it offline and just make sure we're all square on that. But I don't think you missed anything off the top of the head.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
So Chet, is the expectation is you're going to send this back out, and if the localities have additional information to populate the columns where you've highlighted in yellow or made assumptions and filled in, that you would like localities to check that and add as appropriate?
Yes, that would be ideal.
Okay, I think from our end that's certainly doable.
Okay.
So you're going to send that back out, I guess, today, and give us a timeline when you would like the revisions back?
Yes.
All right. That's fine.
I would envision this being an information item for the next authority meeting at the end of the month.
And that's fine. And I think this is on the agenda, at least briefly, for the Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday.
Yes.
Okay. So do you want it, the additional information back prior to Wednesday, or is that?
I don't think it's necessary. This will be an information item for the Finance Committee as well. Again, we just wrapped up populating this over the weekend, so they haven't seen it yet either.
That's fine. Then we'll be expecting you to send this version back out, and we'll collectively make our edits and reviews.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments regarding the FY21 spending plan? Right, hearing none. Next item 8, Regional Public Transportation Plan Progress Report. Adrian, you're going to be able to provide that for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just have a quick update on the progress we've been making over, I guess, since the beginning of the year. We had a consultant-led core design meeting held on January 19th through the 22nd, the majority of the work on the 19th and the 20th. And this was a mixture of many representatives from the various jurisdictions and organizations. We had the City of Richmond, Henrico County, Hanover County, Chesterfield County, VTA, DRPT, the MPO, GRTC, of course, Right Finders, and even Ashland for a little bit. We all kind of sat around a virtual table and designed some expansion scenarios. So these are just kind of concepts with the additional funds that we would use for expansion. So if there were 17 buses, which is roughly $10 million, what could we do regionally with some service enhancements? So we did a coverage scenario. So if more routes are about 60 minutes or 30 minutes, a little more circuitous, but still regional in definition, as well as another version that was a ridership. So serving higher, denser areas and increased frequencies.
So those concepts maps are being refined right now, as well as kind of the policy that's related to both of them. And we plan on switching to more of an engagement and outreach starting around the middle of February. So we'll post it on the website as well as do a survey, and we can, of course, share the concepts with this group. And the idea is to look at the concepts as kind of examples only. If the regional dollars for expansion were spent towards ridership, this is what the model would look like, as well as they were spent towards coverage. We plan on getting back together with a very similar group, if not the same group, in the middle of March, and we'll do kind of a recommended network. And that may end up being something similar to the concepts or like a merged version of both. So we'll design that out. And after that meeting, we'll develop the draft plan in April, and the final plan should be developed hopefully by the end of May. It will come to the GRTC board as well to CVTA TAC, and then finally to the policy board. So it's kind of what we're looking at over the next 3 months pretty aggressively. Any questions?
Thank you, Adrian. Any questions, comments for Adrian? Not hearing any, thank you. Next item, the number 9, Transit Service Governance Report, Progress Report. Chad, are you gonna be able to provide that?
Yes, thanks. The authority on January 29th approved the contract for AECOM and the Enos Center for Transportation to develop the Transit Governance Report, Transit Service Governance Report. And I held had a brief call with the consultant team last week. They are developing the schedule now, and we're starting to set up the a kickoff meeting as set forth in the scope. So we're looking forward to getting that process underway. They have started into phase 1, which is mostly data development at this point. But their focus right now is kind of twofold. That getting the data snapshot of what's existing, and then kind of the outreach component and setting up the kickoff meeting. So I would expect a handful of you will be included as we start to set that meeting up, and look for good potential dates to have that discussion.
Thank you for that update, Chet. Any questions for Chet regarding the Transit Governance Report? Hearing none, moves us to item 10, CVTA TAC member comments. Does anybody have any comments for the group? Seeing none, our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 8th. I assume we're at 1:30 again, Chet? Or 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Very good. And then again, as a reminder, there is a Finance Committee meeting this Wednesday, the 10th at 8:30, and the next full CVTA meeting is, I don't have that in my calendar in front of me. Check, can you pull that before I can?
That would
The
be on,
26th.
yes, the 26th.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. And that will be fully virtual again, or has that decision been made?
I don't believe it's been made, but I'm assuming it's virtual at this point.
I will make that assumption. Do we need to confirm that with the chair?
Yes, please.
All right, I will do that and let you know shortly, by Wednesday, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there's no other items, then we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.